a flagship mirrorless camera, flagship mirrorless camera. Hello my friends, this is Mark from the Wi-Fi Ninjas, and today I wanted to spend a minute or 5 talking about the cameras and lenses for video podcasting, YouTube video production and stuff like this. So I have tested several different cameras, camera bodies, different lenses, starting from the kit cheap lenses to more proper ones. So what have I tested? I've tested mostly Fujifilm cams, starting with the small one, Fuji X-T30. And I quickly realized that it's not too suitable for my needs, so I moved to a bigger one, X-T3, like 1.5 years ago, and it still wasn't a good fit for me, so I have upgraded to Fujifilm X-T4, and this is what I am using now. There is some thinking behind me settling on Fuji X-T4. I had 2 main issues plugging my videos, or video production, I should say. First thing was the autofocus. Okay, so Fuji is well known for having a crap autofocus. I still wanted to stick to Fuji because it looks amazing. I like the retro look of the camera. I like the image quality of the camera. I like the price of the camera. So pretty much I like everything about Fujifilm cameras except of really bad autofocus. So I started with X-T30 and autofocus was acceptable-ish, but I still wasn't too happy about it, so I have upgraded to X-T3, but it wasn't the only reason for upgrading. I will talk about the second main issue in a sec, but in X-T3 I found autofocus to be even worse. It was like constantly pumping, trying to find a focus, and it couldn't. I didn't have any custom settings in the previous firmware of Fuji X-T3 where I couldn't set the focus depth limit to just focus on my face and around it. So it was focusing on a TV behind me, it was focusing on a wall behind me. It thought that my audio diffusing panel behind me is a face for some reason. So I wasn't too impressed with that. And I have finally upgraded to X-T4, which is the successor to X-T3, a flagship mirrorless camera from Fuji. And finally I was able to set this beast up the way I wanted to. So now all the issues with my autofocus are pretty much gone. I'm super happy with the performance of the camera. I don't have any problems with it at all. So I have a few tips for you when it comes to autofocus, and it took me some time through trial and error. I was trying multiple different things until I found the settings that are working for me perfectly. So starting with the first setting on my Fuji camera is to set your focus area to area instead of multi-point, because you have 2 settings there. It can be either area or multi-point. If it's multi-point, then it will like focus on something that is, you know, in front of the camera, or if it's your face, it will focus on that. We don't need that, right? We just need to focus on around where my area of where my face is. So it's in the middle, slightly farther up the screen. So that's where I've set up a focus area that is covering around 3/4 of my face. And that's the way to do it. Then you have 2 autofocus settings, AFC, that stands for continuous, or AFS, that stands for stationary. And I think it's self-explanatory. If you are moving around a little bit, like slightly to the back, slightly to the front, then use continuous, because you want your face to be in focus all the time, especially with the lens that I'm using here. If I'm moving slightly closer to the lens or slightly farther away, focus on my background, it changes how my focus works quite a lot. And I mean it, quite a lot. So I wanted to be constantly focusing on my face. Otherwise, it will be blurred, even if I move it by 10 centimeters each way. So be careful with that. And the next great thing that was introduced to Fujifilm cameras with the latest firmware upgrade is the AF range limiter, where I've set it up to be able to focus from around 20 centimeters from the camera, because sometimes I will be showing you, like, you know, some accessories and I want the camera to be able to focus on that. Then I take it away. I want it to focus straight on my face without scanning the environment, seeing what's behind me. It doesn't care about the behind me. It just looks at the 20 centimeters to 1.2 meters away from the camera lens, and that's where it will focus, okay? It won't focus on anything else. Additionally, face detection must be disabled to set this range of focus, and that's fine. That's absolutely fine. With the focus area set to my face, with the AF range limiter set to up to 1.2 meters, we pretty much told the camera to focus just on my face, which is exactly what I want to do. Even if you don't use the AF range limiter, because in some environments you won't have to use it. For me, it was really bad here. It's quite dark where I am, and it was like focusing on multiple different elements around me. It thought that it's faces and eyes all around, which was not the case. So I didn't use it to begin with anyway. But with AF range limiter, you cannot use it. You have to disable it in order to enable AF range limiter. With settings like this, you should have zero issues with autofocus on Fuji X-T4. Another massive issue that I had was the overheating issue, especially with the small, more compact Fujifilm X-T30. The camera was overheating so fast that just after 4 minutes of recording 4K or 20 minutes of recording 1080p Full HD, it was just shutting down. And there are multiple factors that can affect heating of the camera. So let's start with the most obvious one, the battery. So when you have your battery inserted in your camera and you have it plugged into a wall charger or whatever, like a USB battery, it will be charging the battery as you're using the camera, and the battery will be constantly hot and your camera will be dying way faster. Because when you think about the heat from the battery, how do you normally use a camera? You take it out of your bag, you grab a photo or 5 photos, you put it back, or when you are filming a video, then you will capture a clip, which is 5 seconds, 10 seconds, maybe even 30 seconds. Then you stop, then you move somewhere else, and then 5 minutes later, you capture another clip. So your camera has a breathing room to cool down a little bit. And if it sits on a tripod, like behind your screen, like it's sitting on top of my screen here, sometimes it's turned on all day, like 10 hours a day, when I'm recording quite a lot of content or teaching a class. So I need a camera to be able to withstand this test of time, even in the middle of a summer, even though it's never too hot here in the UK, obviously, especially in my studio. But sometimes it's on a hot-ish side. And my X-T30, when I was testing it in the middle of a summer, was dying extremely quickly, so I couldn't have that. Additionally, when you are recharging your battery while using a camera, typically the battery will be discharging faster than it is charging. So when normally your camera would be up and running for like 40 minutes while capturing video material when it's not connected to mains, you can extend it to like 2 or 3 hours when it is connected to mains, but eventually it will die. So not only it will be hot, but it will die. So you need to have something called a dummy battery. It's like an empty battery shell that you insert where your normal battery would go in, and instead of charging itself while providing power to the camera, it just provides the power to the camera. So you connect this dummy battery to the mains and you have a cable sticking out of your camera, which is absolutely fine because you don't move this camera anywhere. It's just your podcasting or YouTubing video camera that sits there all the time. So a dummy battery is a must. Additional issue that can be plaguing your heat issues is, that's a good sentence, right? So additional issue can be related to SD card. I was testing it with X-T30 and X-T3 where I had SD card inserted. The camera seems to be like buffering all the video material to the card in case you want to grab it or is doing something with it. When I was removing a card after 20 minutes of using a camera, It was extremely hot on X-T30 and somehow hot on X-T3. You don't need to have an SD card inserted into your camera when you are capturing video material like here. I am not capturing it to the camera, I'm capturing it on my computer. So SD card is not required. Another thing that can limit heat issues is the resolution. So 4K, it will kill your camera way faster than, let's say, 1080p because it's less CPU hungry, as well as the FPS, frames per second. If you're recording at 60 frames per second, it will be more demanding on the CPU than it will be on 30 FPS. So 30 FPS is like a standard for webcams, but if you want to have more cinematic look of your video, like I'm trying to get the cinematic look on my video, you can set it up, as I did, to 24 frames per second. Now, what if you don't want to stick to Fuji for some reason? Maybe you don't like it too much. You have plenty of options. All the manufacturers are good. Some are better at some things than the others. Some are worse at different things than the others. Fuji, for example, is well known for its superior video quality. It's really, really amazing. Great sensor, great looking bodies, good value, amazing cameras. But they have really bad autofocus, right? So if you want to maybe have the best autofocus on the market, you might want to take a look at Sony Alpha. Roel Dionisio is using Alpha A7 Mark III camera with a posh lens on top of it, and it not only looks amazing, the video quality, but also autofocus is absolutely top. But if you don't want to spend, £2,000 on a camera plus a proper lens combo, you might want to look at something cheaper, and it's still going to be amazing for this application. Francois from Clear to Send is using Lumix G7. I think that is 1/4 of a price of my Fuji with lens or Roel's Sony with lens. And does it look any worse? In most applications, not at all. If you are recording in a bright room with open window with some natural bright light coming in, it will not make a difference at all. And I really mean it. It will look exactly the same for as long as you have good light. If you, however, want to have more, I don't want to call it more dramatic Hollywood look, but like more cinematic look, like I'm trying to achieve here, then you will need to have slightly better, especially lens, rather than a camera. But my point is, the camera is not the most important thing. The setup and the light is way more important than the camera itself. If you have a camera and a lens that are decent enough, then you will have really pleasing results. But for specific applications, like my application here, you might want to have a brighter lens just to give you the results you are after. Okay, so let's talk about lenses. I've mentioned lenses. Are they more important than the body? Probably. Can they be expensive? Potentially very expensive, even when compared to the body of a camera. When buying a lens, you need to think about two attributes, mostly. First thing that you want to be mindful of is a focal length of a lens. And focal length expressed in millimeters, it will describe the angle of view. So just to give you an example, I am sitting now on 16 millimeters focal length lens that gives me quite a nice blurred background. You can see quite a lot of my fancy lights behind me while my face is staying sharp and everything else is blurred. So it's kind of an effect that I wanted to have in my videos. You might not want to care about that maybe for your application. So you might want to have higher focal length, like 35 or 50 millimeters. Just to give you an example here, if I had 35, you would see that in the camera, okay? 35 mils with a camera like around, 70 centimeters away from my face, it will give you that angle of view. If you went for 50 millimeters, this will give you that angle of view, okay? My face will be taking an entire screen, and you probably wouldn't like to see that close up. Additional thing that the focal length affects is the so-called bokeh effect, where your face stays sharp, but the background stays blurred. So the lower the focal length, the more exaggerated this effect is going to be. And the second attribute describing the lens is the aperture. And aperture, it will affect the performance of a lens, especially in a low light conditions. So it's so-called the brightness of a lens. The lower the aperture, the better the performance in low light conditions. So I am using 1.4 f1 to 1.4, whatever it's pronounced. So 1.4 is considered to be a very good aperture of a quite expensive lens. And I am sitting here, it's very dark in this room. I just have like a key light in front of me, and I have some background lights. I don't have like any main light, and my window is covered right now with a curtain. So I need to have a very good aperture like f1.4 that will allow me to have this more cinematic look. So I have low ISO, I have low shutter speed, and low light, and it still looks quite sharp. I don't have any noise introduced by a lens, so I'm very happy with performance of this particular lens with f1.4. Now, if you have like f2.0 lens, it's still quite alright, but it might not be enough for this kind of application. I was still able to have similar effect that I'm having now with f2.0. So the less impressive the aperture, the cheaper the lens is going to be. So 1.4 will be way more expensive than 2.0, like way more expensive. I mean 4 times more expensive or 3 times more expensive. But with f2.0, I still was able to have a similar effect, but I required to have way stronger key lights in front of my face. So now my light is sitting at 5%. So even when I'm recording something that takes me a few hours, it's still a little bit tiring, but it's doable. But when I had f2.0, I needed to have like 30% of a brightness, and it makes it so bright that after 30 minutes of recording, you already feel sick physically. So I wouldn't like to stick to that. And then you can stick to kit lenses included with cheaper cameras, but they will have even higher focal lengths, like where I think it will be considered lower. So let's say less impressive focal lengths of like f3.5 or f5.6 or 3.5 to 5.6, depending on the focal length on the lens. And you won't be able to get close to that look. But if you were sitting in a bright room and you didn't care about this more cinematic feel to your video material, then it will still be amazing. Okay, so with a good light conditions, the aperture will not be as important as in low light conditions. So I have tested multiple different lenses from Fuji alone. I think I've tested 4, and I've started with a kit lens. I had a Fujinon lens 15 to 45 millimeters with aperture of f3.5 to 5.6, as I've mentioned, and this is how it looks. I think I will like pop up something here just to show you. And it's a good quality lens. Don't get me wrong, but only in good lighting conditions. Then I've tested the Fujinon 50 millimeters prime lens, so it didn't have any movable elements in it, with f aperture of 2.0. And while aperture was alright, just required quite a lot of key light on my face, I think the focal length was too big. So the view was way too narrow. Then I had a very good quality also Fujinon 35 millimeters f2.0 lens, but with 35 millimeters f2.0, not only I had issues with light, which it required too strong light on my face, but also you would see something like this. So I'm not sure if it's as good. And finally now I am using 16 millimeters Fujinon lens. So 16 millimeters focal length with the aperture of f1.4. And now I'm super happy with the performance of that lens. But it's quite expensive. It's around £900. I think that's, well, I didn't pay £900 because I bought second hand. But if you wanted to buy brand new, that's what's going to cost you. So it's quite expensive. Another thing to think about is how to connect this beautiful camera and a lens to be used as a webcam for your computer to be able to capture the video material using it. So most manufacturers, they allow you to connect your camera to your computer directly using USB cable. With the right software, it will be seen as a webcam. I have tested it on both Windows and macOS using my Fujifilm cameras, and unfortunately it doesn't work too well. The frame rate is really disappointing, and the quality is also quite disappointing when compared to connecting an interface that will convert your HDMI signal from your camera to a digital signal to the USB connection on your computer. So I am using Elgato Camlink 4K, and this is like a small dongle thing that sits in between the HDMI port of my camera and the USB port of my computer or docking station. And I can see this Camlink device as a webcam. So it's not too expensive. I'm not sure how expensive is it now. It's like £100-ish worth of equipment, but it works perfectly. It has no buttons, no configuration, nothing. You just connect it in between your camera and your computer, and job's done. You have more possibilities to connect your camera to your computer, more like HDMI to USB interfaces from ATEM, or I think I pronounce it right, ATEM. You have ATEM Pro, ATEM Mini, different devices from that manufacturer as well. When you look on eBay or Amazon, you will have plenty of different interfaces doing pretty much the same thing. I haven't tested them. Some of my friends, they are using ATEM machines and they are working flawlessly. I am using Camlink and it's working mostly flawlessly. Sometimes, very infrequently, like I would say once a month maybe, I will have a slight problem where I look like a robot, like it will be dropping some frames, so it will look a little bit spooky. But other than that, I've not had issues with Camlink at all. Another thing to discuss is how to position your camera. There are two different approaches there. I don't think there is any good or bad, one approach better than the other. It's entirely up to you what you want to achieve and how you want to look like in a camera. First approach is what I'm using here, where you have a camera in the middle. Okay, so the camera is just in front of my face and it's around the same level as my face, and you would like to have it positioned similarly. If you position it too low, you will be looking into your nostrils. It looks weird. When you position it too high, it will also look weird. With your bigger head and smaller body, it's not a good proportion. And also your head, it should be slightly closer to the top of the edge of the camera view when compared to the bottom edge of the camera view. So not in the middle, slightly up and in the middle of a screen. Vertically in the middle, horizontally up, vertically in the middle of a screen. And that's how you position your face and camera in this example. And then another approach is to have a light on one side. I already have light on one side. I don't have light on both sides. I will be discussing it in a future video. But to have light on one side and the camera slightly to the side. So the camera is shooting the shaded side of your face, the side with no key light on, and then you would like to be positioned like slightly to the back, and then you will be looking somewhere there, so at your interviewer, let's say, and you want to have more space in front of you and less space behind you, and then it will look more natural. And also your face should be a little bit higher up horizontally, not in the center. So to the back vertically and slightly up horizontally. Entirely up to you. Additional features that you would like to have in your camera, I wouldn't say that there are too many that are really, really important. If you don't have anything on top of a good camera with solid lens and good lighting conditions, that's fine. But if you want to have some extra bells and whistles, my favorite is a flippable screen, where you can like flip the screen outside of the camera. So when I'm looking here, I'm looking at my face in the screen, so I can see my background, I can see my lights, I can see everything. I can see how I'm positioned in regards to the camera, so I am in the center. I have like this area focus rectangle displayed on the screen. It helps me out a lot. I can see how my camera is configured now. So I can see that I have SS60, f1.4, ISO 160, AFC. So it means like a shutter speed of 1/60th of a second. And then I have ISO of 160, and I have aperture of 1.4 and continuous autofocus. So I know that it's configured as I want it to be. Why is it important? Because if you want to have this more Hollywood interview type of a look in your video, that's the settings you want to use. However, if I open up my window, so maybe I'm doing some casual training and I don't want or don't need to have some background lights and, you know, key light in front of my face. I just have some more natural light. Now I don't have any natural light in this room, but maybe it will be quite tiring to see it in this environment all day. So I would just put everything into auto, and I want to see that on my screen, ideally. So I don't have to like check every time on top of my camera, what are the settings. I don't need to stand up and take a look at that. So flip screen displaying the settings is amazing. Also, not all the cameras, they support the dummy batteries. So make sure that yours does support it. You need to be able to get the dummy battery in and then route a cable from the dummy battery to the mains. So if you want to close the lid behind the dummy battery and have the cable sticking out of the battery compartment, make sure that your camera can do it. And what else is important? I would say a reliable autofocus. It has cost me tons of time to get it right. So if you are thinking about getting a Fuji camera, go to X-T4 straight away or look at Sony. Up to you, really. So that's it, guys, that I just wanted to discuss in this video. I think I've spent a little bit more time than I wanted to, but I think we've covered quite a lot of good technical details there. Hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you back in the next video.